Welcome to our third annual Carl and Marjorie Hertz Lecture. I'm Wendy Winterstein. I serve as the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. This lecture series was created in memory of the founders of Hertz Farm Management to inspire generations of industry leaders, research scientists, and young professionals to reach their full potential. Carl Hertz attended Iowa State during the Depression and graduated with a degree in animal husbandry in 1933. Marjorie graduated in 1935 with a degree in home economics and nutrition. In 1946, Carl and Marjorie decided to farm the family farm near Nevada. Carl consulted on the side, which led to the founding of Hertz Farm Management. Since then, the company has grown to become one of the largest farm management, real estate, rural appraisal firms in the United States. A very special welcome to the members of the Hertz family and company that are with us tonight: Joel Hertz, Mina Hertz, Jacobs, Tom and Joyce Hertz, Randy and Liz Hertz, Chad Hertz. Would all members of the Hertz family and the company please stand so that we may welcome you and thank you. Our speaker for this evening is Jim Tobin. Mr. Tobin is Vice President of Industry Affairs at Monsanto Company. During his 29-year career with Monsanto, he has served in various agricultural marketing and commercial development positions, working with customers and products in the biotech and crop, seed, and chemical divisions. A graduate of Iowa State and a member of the Farmhouse fraternity, Mr. Tobin served as County Extension Director for Iowa State University Extension early in his career. He went on to earn an MBA from Harvard University. He is trustee of the Farmhouse Foundation and Forest Park Forever. Mr. Tobin is a member of the board of the U.S. Grains Council and a member of the Farm Foundation Roundtable. He has served on the National 4-H Council and the Missouri 4-H Foundation. He is a past chairman of the American Seed Trade Association. Please join me in welcoming special guests of Jim's tonight: his wife Gina, his parents Irene and Kelly Tobin, and his daughter Mara. Would you please stand? And there are several other members, I think, of the family, and we want to welcome them as well. So now I'll turn the podium over to Jim. Jim, thank you for being the Hertz Lecture tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Excuse me.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate it. Is the sound okay here? Can you hear me in the back? Good. When we were talking about this a month or so ago, I guess closer to the March Madness, we were hoping that most of you would be watching a basketball game tonight instead of being here. And we were speculating tonight. I think my mother probably would have been the only one here, but I'm not sure. She's a big fan. Thanks for coming. Thanks to the Hertz family for sponsoring this. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about agriculture and to talk about the future. And what an interesting time to be talking about agriculture, because it's in the middle of just about everything going on in the world. It's exciting times and lots of challenges coming. And so I'm interested in sharing with you some reflections on my experiences with ag technology over the last 30 years. I'll even bring in some of my dad's experiences to make it more personal. And then talk about some things that are coming in the pipeline, and also challenges that we're going to have as we bring these things forward. So it's exciting to have the opportunity to do this tonight. At this point, when I'm sitting in the crowd, I'm thinking, who is this guy, and where did he come from? So let me just take a little time to see if I can build some credibility. I'm assuming it's an Iowa crowd, so I grew up on a farm in southwestern Iowa, Taylor County, right on the Missouri border. This is a picture of our family farm. My parents are still involved in the farm there. And Newmarket is the name of the town where we went to school. A good friend of mine, Marcia Henderson, who I was a 4-H officer with, used to get confused about Newmarket, Hog Market, and she actually sent a letter to me, Jim Tobin, Hog Market, Iowa, and they delivered it to me. So, and her brother Len is here. Len, tell her that I still have that letter. In Newmarket, I'm not as old as you're going to think, but we still had crank phones when I was a teenager. So if you're calling to get a date, 3 or 4 or 5 other neighbors are on the line listening. And they didn't coach us, but they knew what was going on. But there were times when family from out of town would call and ask, can I talk to Kelly Tobin? And the operator who was at the switchboard would say, well, he's not home right now, but he's at Gary Springs' house. I'll bring him there. And so she punched it in the right one. So we had service before you could imagine. I had a VOAG teacher, Merrill Lisher, who's passed on, but was very influential, encouraging me to come to Iowa State and to study ag education. And I'm thrilled that my advisor, Harold Crawford, is here. I know he's here somewhere anyway. Harold is here and was at dinner with us tonight, which is fun. Our 4-H leader, C.J. Gauger, is here. C.J., wave to the crowd. They probably all know you. C.J. just turned 99 this month, and we're pleased to have him here, and we're getting ready for the 100th birthday. On the farm, I grew up with 3 brothers. I was the oldest. That didn't mean that I got more respect. It meant that I was older. 4 boys, 6 years apart. We had a lot of fun. Grew a big garden. We were raising hogs and cattle, corn, soybeans. We all had a chance to go on internet. We're very involved in 4-H. We all had chances to do international opportunities. 3 of us went on IFFE exchanges, India, Norway, and I went to the Soviet Union. And we'll talk about that a little later. Terry, through a college program, went to London. And today, 2 of our brothers are working overseas, one in Switzerland and the other one teaching in Uganda. So it's had a big influence, both the 4-H experience and Iowa State. A little bit about our parents. My mom was a home economics teacher for well over 30 years. I lost track of the time. I may not be giving you enough credit, Mom, but she, having raised 4 boys, recognized that while she was doing a great job of helping young women learn how to prepare and be ready for life, the men were missing out, and she had an innovative program. She couched it in a great name, Bachelor Survival, and created a course that would draw the young men into the class so they could learn how to take care of themselves. And she had barbecuing, and we'll make pies and do things that were fun for guys, but she got the point across. She also helped us with our 4-H projects. As you know, 4-H only works if you have lots of good volunteer leaders, and both my parents were leaders in that. And Mom, we're celebrating 80 years tomorrow. We're looking forward to that. So, Dad has been farming since he was a teenager, and I'll talk about some of the things he was doing early on, but an inspiration for me and helped me gain an appreciation for agriculture that I carry to this day. Very involved in conservation. You can see a new terrace in the background. When you're over 80 years old and you're still planting trees and building terraces to make the land better for the next generation, I think that's admirable. He started no-tilling in 1980 and has continuously done that on the farm since then. A story that I sometimes have a hard time telling. A loan officer back in the 70s told my parents that, you know, your sons really need to stay home and spend more time on the farm. You shouldn't let them go off to so many 4-H events. Apparently they saw our picture in the paper. And I'll never forget, my dad told him, you know, we're doing more than raising corn and soybeans, we're raising sons. And he really believed, and my parents believed, that in encouraging us to go out and do things. And to this day, that's benefited all of us. My mother tells a story when Terry and I, my brother who's here, gave our first educational presentation in 4-H on taking a soil sample. She was so nervous in the background because she was afraid that if it didn't go well, I'll never get them to get up and give a speech again. Well, it went well. We got a blue ribbon, and Mom, I'm here today, so thank you. I'm thrilled to be connected with the Hertz program. Our families have a lot of connections through 4-H, through FFA, or through 4-H, through Farmhouse, through Iowa State. I think there's 11 of us between the two families that are Farmhouse alumni, and it's just a real thrill to be part of this program. So thanks for that opportunity. You probably didn't expect to see National Geographic in a presentation on ag technology. I had a chance, and I'm going to give you a couple examples in my talk tonight, mostly for the students, of raising your hand when an opportunity comes by. I had done a 4-H photography class or program, and I took a journalism class here at Iowa State, just a couple buildings over, and had done some wedding photography. When I finished at Iowa State, I volunteered for a 4-H exchange program, which was going to what was then the Soviet Union. As we were getting ready, starting our language class in Washington, D.C., our language instructor had brought in a photo editor from National Geographic. She had pitched him on the idea that these 4-Hers are going to go behind the Iron Curtain. They're going to get a chance to be on farms where none of you can ever go. Why don't you send some photography equipment and get pictures? Well, long story short, they came in and said, do any of you know anything about photography? I raised my hand. We had quite a bit of training with them. They gave us each 100 rolls of film and said, take pictures every day. We came back with a story that was actually published in June of '79 in National Geographic. And the picture on the cover, the grandfather, as we were in his living room celebrating at the end of a week, he said, and now my granddaughter will dance for you. And he pulled a balalaika off the wall and started playing it. And I had my camera and took a picture. And so at 23, I had a cover picture of National Geographic, which was a lot of fun. But again, raise your hand when somebody says, would you like to try something new? A photographer that taught us, or worked with us on street photography, Jack Fletcher, told me something I'd like you, just especially students, write it down. He wanted us to know everything about the film, about the camera, about light. And his comment was, anybody can get lucky and take a picture, but it's the prepared mind that makes discoveries. If you know everything about your field and you're working hard and you're working every day, you're going to make the kind of discoveries. And I could not have taken this picture if I didn't know how to bounce flash and get the right setting. And that, I'll never forget that lesson. While I was there, we worked on 6 state and collective farms in what was then the Soviet Union, Belarus, and Ukraine. 50,000 acres. They were factory farms. You worked 8 to 5. And a story that I think says a lot about what we experienced. We were harvesting wheat in the Ukraine. 60 bushel wheat. It was really good. But they wanted to start at 8 o'clock because that's when the factory time started, and they wanted to stop at 5. Well, it was too wet until about 10 o'clock, so everything plugged up. And then you'd be going great at 5, and the whistle would blow, and everybody would go home. And I never could convince the farm manager to let us get flex time. It was a little bit ahead of our time. So, I'm going to talk about some things that are coming in the pipeline and some opportunities in the future. And because I'm talking about future things for our company, I'm asked to put this forward-looking statement. What this basically means, you can't read it, is I don't want you to buy or sell any Monsanto stock or any Iowa farmland based on what I say tonight. So, if you want some farmland, talk to the Hertz people. There are a lot of trends in agriculture. I mentioned earlier that a lot's going on, and we're right in the middle of it. If it's energy, if it's population, if it's water concerns, if it's climate change even, global food security, here and around the world, agriculture is right in the center of that. And I'm going to talk about things that are coming and give some perspective on historical developments. Let's start with using corn yield over a long period of time. My friend Ted Crosby shared this slide with me. If you look at what was going on in the 1870 to 1930 time frame, people were selecting the best ears they could find. They would look at the plant and see what it looked like and save that. They were basically saving and replanting seed, and they weren't making any genetic gain at all. The yield stayed the same for a long period of time. During that period of time, with the technology that was available, if you wanted more corn, you just plowed some more acres. And the country had a lot of acres, and so that worked. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to work long term, and we're really very fortunate that hybrid corn was developed, and many people here at Iowa State and Iowa were involved in that. You can see that during that period when the first double-cross hybrids were created, they were making about a bushel a year gain by doing that. Single cross gave even more selectivity and almost 2 bushels a year. And then the last box, biotech is helping us protect from insects and weeds, and also provide new benefits that are helping us grow at an even faster rate. And we still haven't solved, if we have a 25-year drought, how to take care of that, although I do believe that we're in better shape than we would have been without these characteristics. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say, my dad, as a teenager, was harvesting corn by hand. He tells me he got about 40 bushel the acre, and you could harvest about 100 bushel a day by hand. A lot of work. I'm sure you felt good at the end of the day that you'd accomplished a lot, but that takes a lot of time. Today, on the same land, and the rainfall hasn't changed, so the same water, same soil, we've added fertility, and we have much better hybrids, and we have biotech traits to help. He's getting 160 to 200 bushels in the same lifetime with the same land. He can call his neighbor and say, I'm ready to harvest, and Jay will come over, and for $35 an acre, he'll harvest all that in a morning. It's all done. So it's exciting how much new technology has made a difference even in one lifetime. We have still significant population growth. We've seen in 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, we went from 1.6 to 6.1 billion, almost 4x. We think that we're at 7 billion now. We think we're going to be at 8.4, and by 2015 it'll be past 9 billion. That alone causes us to have quite a bit of work to do to prepare and be able to feed the population. What's going to make this even more significant is, as people improve their income, one of the first things they do is upgrade from starch-based and vegetable-based protein to meat, milk, and eggs. People like to have chicken or pork in addition to what they've been having. And as you do that, it takes a lot more grain, and you can see the growth that we're expecting in the next 20 years. That translates, because it takes more grain to produce a pound of pork or chicken than if you just eat the grain straightforward. We're going to need 28% more rice, twice as much cotton, more than twice as much in soybeans, and interestingly, only 40% more wheat. Wheat won't grow as fast because as they're moving from starch to protein, they won't eat as much as wheat and won't grow as fast. And then corn, 76%. And at the same time, the arable land, as we add more population, the land availability is not going to grow as fast. So you can see it, arable land per person will go down significantly and make a difference. Just quickly, biotech adoption chart. We first brought out biotech in 1996 in crops here in the United States, and we're over 420 million acres across the world now. For the first time in 2012, developing countries planted more acres of crops containing biotech traits than developed countries. 28 countries as of 2012 were planting 50,000 or more hectares of biotech, and a variety of crops. The ones we're growing here in the U.S. China has papaya, poplar, tomato, and sweet pepper, which you wouldn't think of, but they do have that. They've also approved BT rice, but they haven't commercialized that yet. So let's start with Roundup Ready soybeans. We launched that in 1996, but the work began well before that. The folks working on biotech at Monsanto were brought in 1979, and it was 96 before the first product was sold. So you have to have a lot of patience, you have to have a lot of perseverance, and you have to have somebody with the money to help fund that for 15 years or more. I told you earlier that my dad started using no-till in 1980, and back then the choices for weed control were pretty tough. It was pretty common to walk the beans if something got missed, and I couldn't find my album, but I've got a record called Walking the Beans that they talk about Mr. Cuckelber, and I know some of you laughing and remember that. After Roundup Ready soybeans, you were able to go out and spray in-crop Roundup and control the weeds. And if you had problems with escapes, you just went in and sprayed again. My mom told me that, Jim, you saved us 2 weeks every summer. We don't have to walk the beans now. We can do something else. And you would think, logically, that they would go on vacation. I don't think they did. I think they just worked on something else, but they didn't have to walk the beans. As I think back to critical things in the introduction and development of this technology, in '92, our team did a detailed review of how we're going to get from here to launch and what needs to be done. Everything from seed company licensing to getting the trait in the right varieties to testing and assuring that the yield was there. The regulatory side of this was the biggest unknown because we'd never had one of these products before. The regulatory system wasn't even set up. And the projections were we could get everything else done by '96. Except on the regulatory side, it was going to take until the year 2000. The team at that point said, we're not going to accept 2000. We're going to keep working to get it out in '96. The regulatory people need to catch up. And so we spent a lot of time and effort on what can we do to help. And we did launch in '96. It to me, was a real lesson early that perseverance, teamwork, cross-functional cooperation, and especially with big projects that you really people can make a difference. And those of you that are studying, there's a lot more innovation to be done, there's a lot more work to be done, and we need all of you and your innovative skills to help us get that done. We felt at the time that this technology would be adopted very quickly. We were in the ag chemical business. We had lots of weed scientists who knew what the problems were. And they predicted that within 5 years, 80% of the acres, if we had the right varieties, could be using this technology. Other than hybrid corn, I don't know of any ag technology before that would grow that fast. We worked to get as many seed companies involved as we could. Seed companies at that time didn't make much money on soybean seed. And so they were very reluctant to produce a lot of extra material because if they had extra, they'd have to write that off and it'd wipe out their margins. So we had to do a lot of work helping encourage them to be more aggressive than what they would have otherwise been. And ultimately, the decision was made that we need to be in the seed business. We couldn't get the early cooperation that we thought we needed between breeders and the biotech folks, and we couldn't get the speed to market. And so by investing in seed companies, which was very expensive and controversial at the time, but it's made a big difference in allowing us to bring these new technologies forward. Now, before you think I have not been back to Iowa enough recently, I know we don't grow cotton in Iowa, but I worked on this project from 93 to 96, and I want to share some stories and learnings from the introduction of both Roundup Ready and insect protection, Bollgard cotton, in the United States and in other countries. First, in cotton, unlike soybeans, the value of the seed was about $10 an acre. The value of the technology we were bringing that would control insects and reduce the spraying was worth about $30 an acre. We could take out the need to spray 4 times by having this trait in the cotton. Well, farmers could save seed in cotton. They could go to take their seed from the gin and have it delinted and have their seed back. We would, if we charged the full value and didn't have some protection, we would be out of business pretty quickly. By necessity, we spent a lot of time and effort sorting out how can we find ways to get paid every year. We drew on the winter borer case that Asgrow had at the time. Harry Stein was doing some work with seed tags representing that you can't save this seed. But the real breakthrough was working with our legal folks, Dennis Horner in particular. He said, if you can help me get a license directly with the farmer, I'll license my patent on this technology to the farmer. We'll have the farmer sign an agreement, and if they'll do it, we'll be protected. We brought together a group of farmers, and I worked with them on, here's the idea, here's what we're trying to do. 2 things came out of that meeting. Number 1, how in the world will you know that this trait is in my cottonseed? So we brought in one of our scientists, and like a home pregnancy test, if you've seen those, I hope more you're not using one, but so I'm sorry, that was a cheap shot. The test basically, if the protein's there, a red line shows up and you know that the trait is there. And we had our young scientists show these farmers how to do that. They actually got to do it themselves. And so then they said, well, I'm willing to sign your agreement, and I get it that you know that the trait's there. You have to promise me, if I decide to buy this and pay this extra money, which is 4 times what the price of seed would have been, you have to promise me that you'll enforce the rules, because I have to compete with my neighbor for the land. And if you let him get away with saving seed and I can't, then I'm out of business. And so that led us to be very aggressive about both communicating and enforcing. And today we have a case in front of the Supreme Court where a farmer appealed to the Supreme Court. So stay tuned. But really, really critical. It's allowed us to spend money, and other companies have come in to spend money in varietal crops like cotton, like soybeans. Today in soybeans there are 15 biotech traits in the pipeline. That would have never happened if we didn't have a way to get paid for this technology. Also, you see the logo at the lower left-hand corner, Bollgard. Cotton bolls drop off if a bollworm drills into it early and you lose that yield. We had this great name, Helix, that we wanted to use. Now, Helix, double helix DNA, represented what the technology was. We learned that by testing with farmers that they want to know what the result is, not how the science works. And so Bollgard became the name, and it's very popular and it's been very accepted around the world. We also learned you need to share the value. There was a lot of value created here. The ag chem retailers were also selling cottonseed, and so we cut them in on a percentage of the value because they were going to lose pesticide sales as we brought in these seed products, and that also worked well. I'm going to move to India. I had a chance through 93 to 96 to spend time in India. We wanted to have a licensing agreement or a company to work with in India, and we went around the country and met with a lot of companies, and were able to come up with a licensing agreement. There they have hybrid cotton, which, like hybrid corn, you don't save and plant back because the yield goes down considerably. And so we were able to bring this technology to India. This picture is from my colleague Shukla in Bombay. This is the first day of sales of Bollgard seed this past year. Hundreds of farmers standing in line. Now, most of these farmers have an acre or 2, maybe 10 acres at most. They can carry home all the seed that they need to plant their crop. without, no trucks involved. It's a very, very different environment. If someone tells you that we're forcing farmers to use biotech in India, that's couldn't be further from the truth. They're standing in line to get the product, and I wanted to share that. Today there's they get a 30 to 40% yield increase. 25 million acres are planted using this technology, and we think about 5 million farmers are using it in India. So a developing country, farmers know how to plant seed. If you can make the technology simple and affordable and effective, they will adopt it. A story I'd like to tell here just real quick. Monsanto sponsors a scholarship for I think 20 students every year called the Beecher-Borlaug Scholarship. It honors two scientists, Norm Borlaug, another Dr. Beecher, both involved in breeding that made a difference for the world. We sponsor the graduate work for students to get graduate degrees and training in both rice and wheat research. Not a lot goes on in that area, and we wanted to help pick that up. I met the students at the World Food Prize this last year, and one of the students, when I found out he's from India, I asked about Bollgard, have you used it? He came from a 10-acre farm. His family grew cotton. Everything's done by hand sprayers, hand planting, hand harvesting. I asked him, what difference did Bollgard make? And he said, well, we got much better yield, we didn't have to spray as much, and it increased our profitability significantly. And I said, what'd you do with the money? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, well, I got to go to college. Well, think about, he's now in London getting a graduate degree in breeding. Changed the man's life. Well, there's 5 million families that are having that experience, and it's really exciting when you can see the benefits of the technology and what it can do for people around the world. Okay, another break. I talked about, I'm going to share some opportunities. This is another one where I was going to India. My uncle, Father Pat Tobin, who's a diocesan priest in the Kansas City Diocese, back in the 60s, before Mother Teresa was really well known, wrote a letter to her and said, I'm working in the inner city slums in Kansas City. Could you help me understand what you've learned about working in tough environments? She said, yeah, come to Chicago. I'm going to be there next month. And I don't know that she ever gave him any advice. What she did was said, you're going to come and help do retreats for me at my mother houses around the world. And so he did that on his vacation for 30 years. He gave me a number when he heard I was going to Calcutta, where they're based, and he said, you need to visit with Sister Andrea when you get to Calcutta. Well, I had all these meetings going on. I put the number away and thought, I'll probably never get to do this. But I took the number. I was meeting with the India Tobacco Company, and you might think, Jim, you're trying to sell cottonseed. Why would you talk to India Tobacco? Well, the meeting didn't go very long, so I had the extra half day that I didn't plan on. And I decided, okay, I went to the concierge and said, can you help me find this lady? Sister Andrea, who's here on the right, is a medical doctor. She's given her life to help the Missionaries of Charity. She showed me around the orphanage where they had 300 children, and I had a wonderful time visiting with them. These are kids that nobody's willing to adopt, that they're taking care of. Now, an hour and a half is an incredible experience. The story is a great one there, but there's one more layer. We got done with the tour, and she said, would you like to meet Mother? And I said, do you mean Mother Teresa? Well, sure. Well, yes. So I went out. The driver who had thought I was crazy for going to the slums of Calcutta now really thinks I'm crazy because these two nuns are coming with me. We drove across town to the Mother House, and the Missionaries of Charity Mother House, very simple, went up to the second floor, and this magnificent lady walks out and gave me the warmest handshake I've ever had in my life. Wanted to know, do you have children? Wanted to know about my family. She blessed some medals for my children. She signed some prayer cards. And here, as she's handing me the prayer cards, Sister Andrea says, now, Mother, you need to look up for this picture. Just as common as could be. While I was there, she turned to me and said, now Jim, I'd really like for you to pray for me. I'm going to China next week, and I'm going to try to open an orphanage, and they don't really want me there. Would you pray for me to help me be successful? And humbling experience when a living saint asks you to pray for her, but this lady knew how to get a lot of people involved in a great experience. Again, raise your hand when you have an opportunity. So, on the corn side, I talked about Roundup Ready soy. In corn, we protected with biotech using insect protection and weed control. My memory is that when we were talking about doing Roundup Ready in corn, it was really obvious in soybeans that everybody wanted this. Farmers had pretty good weed control options in corn. We had a devil of a time internally convincing people that we needed this for corn, because at the time we were selling a lot of herbicides in corn that would be replaced. We had even more trouble with some of the major seed companies who didn't feel like this had much value. Today it's probably on more than 80% of the corn acres. It's turned out to be a really successful product. The corn rootworm trait, providing protection against the below-ground root feeding. At the time, before this trait was introduced, my memory is 13 or 14 million acres were getting an insecticide treatment, and most people thought when we launched this, the market opportunity would be to replace that. Well, today it's on over 30 million acres. We found out that there's a lot of damage that occurs at levels that people weren't picking up and couldn't see a difference using insecticides. But we actually got a yield benefit, and especially during dry years when corn is under stress, having the roots fully intact makes a huge difference. If they've been pruned, the plant goes to a lot of work to replace the roots, and you don't get the yield that you would otherwise. I'll never forget one of the and I'm not going to name names, but one of the senior executives at one of the big corn companies, when we were talking about licensing Roundup Ready, and we weren't successful early on, said, "Jim, how dare you come to me and ask me to pay you something for one gene that's going to let you sell more Roundup? You should just make your money on Roundup. There's never going to be any value on the seed side. You let me take care of that. But I've worked for 70 years to move all these genes around and make these 60 or 70,000 genes work, and you're coming in with one gene and trying to convince me to pay you. No way." It took a while. So, in wheat, the jury's still out. We don't have biotech traits in wheat. We were working on Roundup Ready in wheat and some disease work. In 2003, we stopped that program because, frankly, we didn't have good farmer support. They were worried about half of the wheat in the U.S. is exported, and they were worried about the export markets. We re-entered in 2009 because, if you'll remember, there was a wheat price spike in 2008 and 9, and we had millers, bakers, people in the food chain coming to us unsolicited saying, "Would you please get back involved in wheat? We need more wheat. We need more productivity. We're losing wheat acres to corn and soybeans because they're so productive. And so would you get back in?" And rather than just say, "Well, okay," our board asked that we survey the farmers to find out what they would do. And we asked them, "Are you willing to pay every time you use a new technology in wheat? In other words, don't save seed, or at least pay if you do. And are you willing to use biotechnology?" And the surveys came back 79% at that time did support that. And so we've re-entered. We're working on not Roundup Ready, but glufosinate and dicamba tolerance. And we're also looking at disease options that we think can make a difference. We're also bringing new breeding technology into wheat that I think can provide more yield. But the jury's still out. We need to make sure that we can get paid, and so that'll be an opportunity for another conversation in the future. As we look, at least from our perspective, biotech alone isn't going to solve all the challenges we have. Plant breeding is going to be really critical, and that's why we got involved more closely in seed. And we need to make some agronomic changes if we're going to find ways to significantly increase yield. I showed you a graph earlier of corn yields. If you look from 1970 on, you can see the blue line here shows what would be expected if we stayed on trend line. Yellow is what we think we can get if we can add agronomic performance, advanced breeding, the green, and then taking it all the way up to the top, biotech traits that can help us significantly improve yield. And the goal would be 280 to 300 bushel by 2030, a very, very aggressive target that we recognize. So how are we going to do it? I'm going to give you some examples. If you're interested in more detail, our pipeline program that was presented in January is on our website. You're welcome to go in and take a look and give me a call if you have questions. We have to keep coming up with new modes of action for insect control. You have challenges with resistance over time. It's a natural occurrence. You have to stay ahead of it. And so we're working very hard to get a third generation. And you can see the difference in control if you don't have protection versus what these new products can do. More importantly, they're a different mode of action that's completely different than what we've used so far. I talked about agronomic performance. You can see in this representation at the top. This is in Gothenburg, western Nebraska, where they probably expect to get 70 bushel a year, even in a good year. If you do everything wrong, that's what you get. If you no-till and do a better job of planting the right depth, it gets better. Here's better weed control, improved genetics, adding an insect trait to protect the plant. And then the last set, and just for visual, we have a drought-tolerant trait that's helping the plant better deal with drought conditions. Rather than completely shutting down like the corn plant does today, it continues with photosynthesis and uses the water more efficiently. And we're seeing yield benefits from doing that. There's a lot more work to do in this area. And it's complex. The significant thing is we're breeding in that environment now rather than breeding in Iowa and testing in Nebraska. I don't know how many of you ever have detasseled corn. It may be the hottest, toughest job in Iowa. It's very difficult to get people to do this. We're working on a way. We don't put the Roundup tolerance in the tassel itself. And so the female plant where you want to harvest the hybrid corn doesn't have tolerance. You come in and spray it at the right time with Roundup, and it makes the pollen sterile so that it doesn't self-pollinate. And we believe that this will work to replace the need to detassel in these crops. Another tool we have called the seed chipper. I don't have time to show you a video, but if you go online, you can see one. Or come and visit our research center. We'd be glad to show you. In the past, we would go out and look for one trait to try to see if it's there or not. And you would take a leaf hole punch a hole in the leaf, and take that disc and test it to see if your trait was there or not. Today, we're taking chips from the seed, and you can, I think I've got a slide here of it. Here's the seed chipper a little up close. It's slicing off just a slice of the kernel, and I think, yeah, this will show it. You take off a slice where it won't hurt the germination, so you can still use the seed, but you can now take that chip and analyze it, and instead of analyzing it for one trait, we may be getting 1 million data points now, sequencing completely the genes in there. The breeders now used to check for one trait, or they go out and grow it and see what happens. And today, they know what's going on in that seed before they ever plant it again. If they send 1,000 seeds in, we send the 1 or 2 back that have the combination they want, and that's all that they plant. It's probably taking 2 years off the breeding cycle and allowing us to move specific traits in ways we couldn't before. In soybeans, we've seen resistance build up in some selected weeds to Roundup, and we're bringing dicamba tolerance and other chemistry into soybeans. If you just spray with Roundup on resistant weeds, this is kochia in Nebraska, it doesn't really work. If you use 2,4-D before you plant in the middle picture, it works, but not very long. And then in the right, it completely cleans it up if you have dicamba tolerance. You still use Roundup for the other weeds, but it's been very successful in test plots, and we could have this as early as next year, certainly by 2015. Aphids have become more of a problem in certain parts of the country. We're working on solutions for that. Root knot nematode, or cyst nematode, is a problem also, and we have both biotech and chemical solutions for that. Here's an example of a chemical solution that is working very well, and we're encouraged by the early results. I'm going to shift from agronomic traits to some quality traits. Here we have two in soybeans. One produces omega-3, which has health benefits. You can get it out of fish oil, or now we could provide it through soybean oil. This particular product is called Vistig Gold. This one has much lower, 60% less saturated fat, and if you compare it to kind of the gold standard is olive oil, it's as good or better in monounsaturated, and the saturated levels are even lower in Vistig Gold, which we're very encouraged by. We went to food companies years ago and said, if we could create the optimum oil, what would you like? They always want it as cheap as possible, so we have to start with that. But they wanted lower saturated fat, higher monounsaturated, and as you compare to the different oils, this one has some real potential. And this we're growing it on a small scale. We don't have export approval yet to China, and so we'll be growing it selectively here in the U.S., less than 10,000 acres this year, but next year we hope to have even more, and it's very encouraging. The challenge here is getting farmers to grow it. You have to keep it separate, you have to deliver it to the crush plant. Not everybody wants to do that. They're used to selling it wherever they want, and so we have to pay a premium, and we're working out how do you do that in a way that still has enough value that the food companies will actually buy it. This could add quite a bit of value to the whole soybean industry. I don't have enough time to talk about sustainability. We do a lot of work in this area. I'd be glad to talk in the future if you want. Here's a chart for corn that shows over time how we've made progress in the really key areas. Land use, if you get more yield on the same land, the amount of land you use per unit of production goes down. Soil erosion, we've made great progress. Water, energy, and greenhouse gases, and we're going to have to do more of this. There are food companies that are asking for certification of the soybean industry. I think this will be an area that will have a lot of challenges in the future in explaining what we're doing. We're doing a lot to help describe and explain it. The Keystone Group is a group of like-minded companies working together to present this. Another topic for future discussion, but I'll hit it really quickly here, is working with integrated farming systems. Here we're helping the farmer by taking soil maps, yield charts, nutrient maps, and taking what we know about the hybrids and providing a prescription. Here's the right hybrid for this particular field, and here's the variable rate that you need to plant it. We can make a lot of progress here, and there'll be more. We're doing it, I think, on 120 farms this year. This is exciting stuff. It'll use GPS and all the monitoring and data capabilities in a way that we've proven 5 to 10 bushel. I think we'll ultimately get 20 bushel an acre extra by doing the right thing at the right time. We'll probably have planters that will have 2 different hybrids on them, and you'll shift hybrids based on your position in the field. Working with machinery companies to help make that happen. We're doing a lot in vegetables. Monsanto's the biggest vegetable seed company in the world. We're trying to make vegetables more tasty, more fun, to encourage people to eat more. If you eat more vegetables, it's pretty certain it'll be good for you. Peppers that are smaller, sweeter, kids could put them in their lunchbox rather than potato chips. No offense to the potato growers, but again, mega trends. We need a lot more cooperation throughout the food industry. Food systems are challenging, and yet the opportunities are great. And those of you that are students, just incredible opportunities. All the inventions don't have to happen in the lab. There's a lot of innovation that needs to happen on the business side, And I hope by giving you some examples you can see where you might have opportunities. As we look to the future, I start with what will China do. China needs to feed their people. Their income is growing. They're going to ask for much better, higher quality food. The run-up in soybean purchases has been incredible. During the last decade, their yield per acre on soybeans has not changed. They're not making the progress on the seed side that they need to. They're going to need grain and soybeans from the U.S. Technologies that are coming, our experience has been when we bring a new technology, we can get about a third of the value that's created. The farmer gets the other 2/3. Now the farmer's taking the risk of production of weather, and our experience is if you charge too much, they just don't use it. And I know some of you in the room are farmers or grew up on a farm. And so if you believe the technology that I laid out and the opportunities that we could significantly increase yield over time, and 2/3 of that increase is going to go to the farmer, then I think you've got some really interesting conversations about what land is worth, both today and in the future. And I think Carl Hertz would appreciate us having that conversation, so I'll put it out there. I can't begin to tell you what interest rates are going to do or what the price of oil is going to be, but I can give you some perspective on what's in the pipeline. And this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It has to be in the pipeline 7 to 10 years, but it's there and it's coming. And I think you are going to have a lot more corn and soybean production. For students, you've got a really rich learning laboratory here. Take advantage of it. Raise your hand. Volunteer for opportunities. Learn how to work on a team. The projects I've been involved with are never done by one person. It always takes a lot of people, a lot of talent, and you learn from others. If you can develop that in college, you'll be ahead. And please take advantage of the opportunities to work overseas. It's a lot easier today, I think, to get an overseas assignment, to get a chance to do a semester abroad. Take advantage of that. You just get so much more perspective on your own country by living elsewhere. Intellectual property will be important. I don't have time to go into a lot of detail there, but you can sense that some of the things we've done have helped bring in a lot more research and allowed us to do more things. I would close on this slide with, and I look forward to your questions, the opponents of new technology are not going to go away. They've been here forever. The people in the dairy industry sent me articles about when the milking machine was invented. People were really upset about that. When the steel plow was first invented and used, they were worried that it would poison the soil. Hybrid corn, I showed you where it was adopted in the U.S. It wasn't adopted in France until the 60s because they were worried that we were messing with Mother Nature and we might be contaminating the seed supply. This is not new, but today it's so much easier to get your word out through the internet, through social media, that those who oppose technology are spreading that word very effectively. And I would ask that each of you that know anything about agriculture take it upon yourself to stand up, speak out, share what you know. You don't have to be an expert in production agriculture, but there's only about 1% of us. And Pam Johnson, who's now the president of the National Corn Growers from here in Iowa, told farmers recently in one of her speeches that 1% of us that know production agriculture have to talk to the 99% that don't. I'm giving you some examples here of organizations where you can go to get more information, to get better informed. IFIC works with food, with the food retailers. U.S. Farm and Ranch Alliance, I'm personally involved with farmers, 60 organizations gathering together to help farmers in food dialogues with consumers very successfully. And a group that is organized out of Des Moines, Truth About Trade and Technology, is doing a phenomenal job of helping farmers talk and get their word out through media. Also, foodintegrity.org is another source of terrific support. So I challenge you to speak up. We have incredible challenges ahead of us. we can't do it unless we have the freedom to operate, unless we have the opportunity to bring this technology. And technology, as you can see, when you don't have it, you flatline on yield. We can't afford to do that. With that, I'd like to again thank the Hertz family for sponsoring this. It's a real delight to have had a chance to talk to you. I hope we've left some time for questions, and I'm happy to take any questions, or I believe there's a reception afterwards. I'll be glad to stay if people want to talk. So.
Questions for Jim?
Oh, yes, thanks.
So Jim, how old were you when you visited Mother Teresa?
That was 1993, and I had more hair then, yes.
Right. Here's a question.
She was younger then, too.
I think the reason he has
Yes, sir.
Again, you mentioned China, and we hear lots about intellectual theft in China. What does your company think about how to approach China and other similar?
Well, it's a good question. What about intellectual property in China? A couple ways I'd handle that. One, I was there after the Olympics, and if you're walking around China, there are shops everywhere. There are people selling things to you, just anything you can imagine. But anything that had to do with the Olympics was only in the official store. Now, if China wants to manage trademarks, if they want to manage intellectual property, they know how to do it. They're very good at that. I think when China gets their own inventions, biotech, and other inventions that they can license around the world, they'll be much better at protecting it. Today, our company is not working in soybeans, for example. Very hard to get paid there. We are working in corn. We have to be very careful with our foundation seed. Recently, somebody got over the fence and took some inbred seed at harvest time. The police came and stopped them. We asked them to, and their solution was to give the corn back. They didn't do anything to these people. So there's some work to be done on how you protect. But by working with hybrid corn, which you can't save and plant back and get the same yield, if you can manage the production side, we believe that we can do that, and we're working to do that. I think it would be easy to step back and say, well, let's just let them do their own thing. I think for them, they have to have food security. They have to have better yields to have them feel better about buying more corn and soybeans from the U.S. So I look at it as you have to do both, but it's challenging. Yes?
I guess working in the industry for the last 30-plus years, what's been the greatest reward you've seen in agriculture around technology, and what's the biggest opportunity you see in the next 50 years for technology in agriculture?
Well, I talked about both of those. The personal satisfaction when your family says we're using this on our farm and it's working and it's making a difference, that it doesn't get any better. Hearing somebody in India say that it's changed my life, that's going to change generations. That's really, I can get up in the morning for that. What's coming? All the challenges we have in feeding the world. I think the opportunity to use technology and innovation, both on the business side and the science side, can be really significant. I think managing data, there's a lot of value there that we've just scratched the surface. At your age, you've seen incredible things happen in electronics. I think we're kind of scratching the surface like we were with electronics probably in the 60s or 70s. So it's going to increase, and we'll do a lot more. So. Yes?
You have a question about House Resolution 933 that I think was passed this week in this week in the Senate. Why did Monsanto pursue a biotech writer that is not wanting to face prosecution?
Yeah, the question is about a House writer. The concept is both in sugar beets and in alfalfa, a number of groups took the federal agencies to court saying you didn't do all the work you needed to do correctly to approve these products. And when the judges said that, at least with sugar beets, we had to tear up some fields and farmers couldn't go ahead and harvest their crop. And we asked the legislature, which is the way to handle changes in regulations, to say that if a product is approved under the regulatory standards of the U.S. government and a court decides that they haven't taken all the steps they needed to take, the farmers can still harvest their crop. They can still go ahead and finish what they started and not be held up while the court is deciding what needs to be done. And so it's a group of industry and companies like ours working on that. But the idea is to let farmers go ahead and finish with a crop that was approved when they planted it and not be held up by the court. The court can still decide you need to do more work, but we'd like to be able to allow farmers to keep using the product while they're doing that assessment. So, kind of complicated. Dave Tierney is the expert on that, so if you questions for him. Okay, yes?
There's an awful lot of arid and it's non-arable land that is not being cropped now. Is Monsanto working on some inedible types of oilseeds, Cocoa or Camelina or Carolina, you can grow in other places to satisfy the feed?
Yeah, it's a good question. Are we working on non-edible crops that could be grown in areas that aren't being used today? The Danforth Center in St. Louis is doing work like that. We decided that commercially we were going to focus on what we could create value and convince our shareholders we should invest in. But there are a lot of things that can be done, and we helped start with a number of other organizations, the Danforth Plant Science Center, and they're working on a number of projects like that. Their website would have that. It's and they also work on things like cassava that it'd be hard to commercially benefit from it, but it needs to be done and can be helpful. And so we're supporting, and we've actually provided technology, either licensing or actually given them things to help them do that very valuable work. I think it's a good point.
Well, a round of applause again for Jim.